There was issues last week, and a lot of it was anecdotal evidence, but I spoke to many GPs who did not receive their vaccines on time. And it was right across the state. County Monaghan particularly was bad, but there was many examples, and I dealt directly with GPs and with the HSE trying to resolve the problems. And that was problematic, and it showed that if there are problems at that level, when we're only rolling it out for the over 85s, what will happen when we get to the general population rollout? Can I ask you the question in relation to GPs over the last number of weeks, and some of them who claimed that they did not get their vaccines in time, and many of us were contacted by relatives of older people, some in their 90s, who were in GP surgeries expecting to get their vaccine and it didn't happen. Do you have numbers of how many reported cases of GPs that were due to get their vaccines on a certain day and it didn't happen? Because that, I'm sure, will be valuable information for you so that we can learn lessons as we move on to the next numbers of cohorts. So is that data available, and do you know how many reported cases of GPs who were due to receive their vaccine on a certain day and it didn't happen?
With regards to the GPs, there's about 1,300 GP practices involved, and it was ramping up over a 3-week period. The latest information I have as of this morning, if you'll bear with me for 1 second, Deputy, is that approximately 65 of the GP practices, and they were practices with below 200 patients over the age cohort, weren't buddying up for various reasons. My understanding is they were smaller GP practices. In some cases, due to location, it was very difficult for them to buddy up. So they're all being contacted today and tomorrow, and a delivery plan has been put in place that they all get their deliveries next week. And then secondly, there is a group, my understanding is, of about 25 other practices with very small numbers of patients over 70. The HSE is engaging with them. But I would say, Deputy, that while the vast majority of the GP clinics got the deliveries, they might not have got them on exactly the day, but got the deliveries, there was a small number. There were some issues in that supply chain, and the HSE is working hard to resolve it.
Can I put my remaining questions to you, Minister, in just one block if I can? And can I ask you to outline to the House what is the new target date for all of the over 85s being vaccinated, and what is the new target date for all of the over 70s? Because we're now hearing that some other countries in Europe may now use the AstraZeneca vaccine. So can you inform the House today when it is that all the over 70s in this state will be vaccinated? We hear that Britain are now examining the possibility of a third jab in relation to the vaccine in the autumn. Is that something that is being considered in this state? And also people who are housebound. And I welcome the move as well, by the way, as somebody who first raised this issue in relation to people who have underlying medical conditions, and that's starting next week. Some of those will also be housebound. Some of the older people are housebound, and there's questions in relation to GPs. So if you can answer GPs being part of that, if you can answer that question.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. So the target for the first dose for the over 85s is for the vast majority of them to have been done by the end of this week, which was the target. As I said, there's a small number of GP practices, for the reasons I just gave, that didn't get their deliveries this week, and they will get their deliveries next week. And then to the point you've raised before around the housebound, the good news on that is, so GPs will be able to, and I believe are already going to house visits. The National Ambulance Service is being used as well. There was a question at the start as to whether or not the mRNA vaccines could be transported a second time. The clinical advice now is that they can be. And to your question, Deputy, on the over 70s, I think actually the answer is partly in the second part of your question. I think you quite rightly point out that some countries are now electing to use AstraZeneca for the over 70s. There is emerging evidence from UK studies that NIAC is looking at the moment. At the moment, the clinical advice remains that the mRNA vaccines would be used for the 70s and older. However, NIAC is always looking at the emerging evidence, and certainly if it would be the case that if they advised, as per France, for example, I believe is now going above 65, it would certainly accelerate the dates. Which means, to your final question as to when the end date for that cohort will be, as with so much in this programme, it depends. It depends on the clinical advice. It depends on the deliveries coming in.